Hey, welcome to Lab, the podcast. So good to be with Mike Sherrard. Mike is the president of Apologetics, Inc., a cultural apologetics ministry that exists to make disciples and show the world the truth, goodness, and beauty of Jesus Christ. Before joining Apologetics, Inc., Mike pastored Crosspoint Community Church in Peachtree, Georgia for over 10 years. He's an international speaker specializing in worldview, ethics, and apologetics. He's appeared on television and radio programs, been on Fox News and Moody Radio, and is a well-respected author of Relational Apologetics, defending the Christian faith with holiness, respect, and truth, and Why You Matter, which is the book I want to get into today. Mike has a BA in religion and a master's in divinity with a concentration in apologetics from Luther Rice, and is working on a PhD in apologetics at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He married up to Terry, and she's Terry Anna, formerly Watts, living in Peachtree, Georgia with 5 kids and attempting to make it through every day. I'm like that. I have 4 kids, so you're ahead of me. But Mike, so good to be with you. I'm glad to see you.
Zach, my friend, good to be here, man. Looking forward to hanging out.
Yeah, it feels so good. Anytime I get a chance to have time with you, there's like joy when I see my time block, and I'm like, oh, I got Mike today. This is so good. Peachtree, Georgia. That's like the most Georgia name that you can possibly have.
Well, yeah, and it's Peachtree City, Georgia. And it does sound made up and like this magical little place. And it really actually is. The whole town is connected by golf cart paths. And so you got to run to Publix and grab, whatever it is, just hop on the golf cart. And when we moved here, the golf cart seemed like a bit of a novelty, like, whatever. But it's actually quite fun. And it's a way to take maybe some things that become routine and mundane and to find little bits of joy in it. A trip to the grocery store, right? Pop on the golf cart, and it's kind of a magical thing. It reminds me a little bit of Lewis's essay on bicycles about enchantment and re-enchantment. And it's funny how something like a golf cart path taking you to routine places brings the joy and the mystery. If that doesn't sound overly poetic or dramatic, it brings it into your life.
No, I think it's not overly poetic or dramatic. It just is. I think a fort for a kid, throw a blanket over a chair and you've got a fort. Mm-hmm. This I love that. And it's funny how
that's what it is.
Novelty becomes necessity. We have the same thing in South Tampa. Everybody's got a golf cart and you're like, come on, why do you have a golf cart? And then like 3 years later, you're driving a, $30,000 golf cart down the street. Like, how is this? This is where we're at. So.
Yep.
Hey, just because I can't get it out of my mind, is locate Peachtree City, Georgia on the map. Like, are you nearby Atlanta?
Yeah, 30 minutes from Atlanta, southwest of the city, about a 25-minute ride to the airport. And if you know Atlanta, its traffic rivals LA traffic. I mean, nothing compares to LA traffic. LA, you're out there and it's something that'll make you lose your salvation driving in that traffic. And it's a joke, of course.
It's
is it, Mike?
And Atlanta probably, in my mind, ranks second. But on the south side here, you kind of get the best of both worlds. The traffic isn't so terrible, but you still quit close to the city, close to the airport. So for, work like what I do, it makes things a little bit easier. But I love Georgia. I love Peachtree City, travel a good bit and love this area. Glad to call it home.
Yeah, you can get in and out of Atlanta to most places. So I imagine for what you do, it's perfect. And you still get fall. I'm jealous of that. That turn is probably happening already. Yeah, you got a sweatshirt on. Not us. I'm willing it.
Yeah,
forward.
I've been this week. I've worked outside all week. I was tempted to do this podcast outside, but because in Georgia, you do get fall. Fall is really nice. Humidity moves out, cool temperatures. I mean, the rest of the year, it's like a swamp around here, but this is a nice period.
Yeah. Well, enjoy it for us. So we'll dive in. For a while, you and I know this, but our team's been considering these 2 paralleling crises, the crisis of meaning and downstream of that, this crisis of meaningful connection. And we've gone around that. We talk about uncovering enchanted reality, which we'll talk about in a little bit and get your perspective on. But that hunt, that exploration around the idea of meaning is center point to the work that you're doing at Apologetics Inc. And before we dive in, you were formerly the C.S. Lewis Society. So I just am curious, as you guys have made that pivot, uh, describe like the center of your work that you and your team are doing at Apologetics Inc.
Yeah. So when I was hired about a year and a half ago, and I'll keep this from being a long story, I saw an opportunity to take 40 years of faithful apologetic ministry that was done under the name C.S. Lewis Society and to really just expand it by creating a platform for apologetic ministry that's better served under the name Apologetics Inc. It's interesting. The C.S. Lewis Society, once it was incorporated in the early 2000s as a nonprofit, it chose the founder, Tom Woodward, chose the incorporated name Apologetics Inc. He had already secured the domain apologetics.org. And so for, over 20 years, the legal name of the ministry has been Apologetics Inc. It was just doing business as the C.S. Lewis Society. And C.S. Lewis, I mean, I don't think it's an understatement to say changed my life. He was probably the first Christian author whose work I came across and I was like, wow, Christians are smart. And that's a bit of an overstatement, but a lot of I grew up in some good churches, but they still were kind of, church and real life are almost separate, if that makes sense. There just wasn't a lot. It was, the church world can become this subculture of religious things that just seem, especially when you're a kid, like different from the rest of life. Like the messages that I hear, it's not that it's not helpful to my life, but it's not almost like directly insightful or impactful into the rest of my life, in a way that it's almost like you couldn't get this teaching from other places. I hope that doesn't sound overly harsh, and I hope you and others maybe get what I mean. But when I read Lewis, I was like, oh my goodness, I've never heard Christians combat the meaningful issues of our time, the issues that all people are dealing with, not just Christians or whatever, and engaging them with wit, with humor, with even sarcasm at times, but also with reason. And so Lewis was probably the first author I came across like that. So tremendous respect for, of course, C.S. Lewis. So the moving away from the name has nothing to do with that. It's simply the name Apologetics Inc. can support a better range of apologetic initiatives than the C.S. Lewis name. For example, one of our initiatives is a youth discipleship initiative. It's a resource for the church on how to develop welcoming, safe environments where teenagers can have conversive kinds of discipleship opportunities to wrestle with the really important, meaningful questions in life. And if you think about like, what is the straight line from C.S. Lewis to youth discipleship? Well, there really isn't one. I mean, Lewis as a Christian would have been committed to discipleship, but you don't think of like, if you hear about 7x7 conversations and that initiative of ours and youth discipleship, you go, oh yeah, C.S. Lewis, I get it. No, there's no straight line there. So we've repositioned the C.S. Lewis to be C.S. Society as one of our initiatives to be basically a place for vocational friendship. And we're moving forward as a ministry under the banner of Apologetics Inc. to support a growing team of content creators, speakers, and various discipleship and outreach initiatives.
You did that like you're a pro. Like that was well done.
Well, someone's gotta make the pitch.
Well, I say that kind of half jokingly, but you are such a good leader. You're a skilled communicator. You collaborate, you bring people together, but you also have that thought leadership part of you. And you're a deep guy, you're a wise guy, and you are well read. And I appreciate that both sides of you. I've told you that before, that I respect you've got the executive part of that, but you do keep your feet in the water and that into the pool that is challenging. How do you create space, like in your current role, to keep that part of you well irrigated, to use a Lewis term? But how do you stay in both of those places in your current role? And then we'll talk about your book, but I'm just curious.
Man, that's the $1,000,000 question. I don't know that I do it well. I really don't. It's a constant burden. A good friend of mine, mentor, colleague, Scott Klusendorf, he's passing on this piece of advice from Jim Collins. I think he cites this piece of wisdom from. He says, you can either grow great organizations or great ideas. It's almost impossible to do both.
Wow.
And I certainly feel that. I really do, because, the demands of organizational leadership are intense. They really are. I mean, there's just without having to get into all the details of running an organization, there's a ton of things to do. But when your organization is a ministry and it is dealing with the meaningful ideas of your time, you can't lead that organization well if you're not still connected to these ideas, exploring them, creating times, having times for creativity. Just read a book, just wonder, question, talk with friends. So it is an ongoing struggle to have that balance. And fortunately, though, I have a really good team at Apologetics Inc., people that are aware of that. And so frequent conversations are, how can we manage our schedule best? In regards to scale, because a lot of opportunities are coming our way right now. What's a reasonable way to scale our organization without overstretching ourselves or becoming people we just quite frankly don't want to become out of necessity to maintain, a growing organization or whatever. So I don't know that I'm the best at it, to be quite honest. It is a real concern. And one I'm trying to work out. So I'm happy for good advice from you or others on how to do that. I did have, just last thing on this, another good friend of mine, Mark Erickson, where he said, gosh, we see it all the time, that it would seem that people who are kind of at the top of their organization, that they could create whatever kind of organization they want, and yet they all inevitably create their own prison.
So why do we do that?
And that's a whole episode in and of itself, right, for organizational leadership. But the long and the short of it is, it's very much at the forefront of my mind, but not just my mind, other people within the organization. And through prayer and through wisdom and counsel and even trial and error, we're trying to find the right way to be good stewards of our roles. And for me, it's to not forsake creativity for organizational leadership, and doing the best I can at it.
Yeah. Well, you're doing a good job. And I think Ian McGilchrist, all his writing on the right and left hemisphere of the brain, the master and his emissary, and just the over biasing of that, you can grow an organization, and that's the priority. And that you can take the idea side of that or the organization side of that, but to do both is almost impossible. I think I agree with that. I think that's why team is so important, so that you can diversify and have the people who are gifted to lead and build that organization. Because without the healthy organization, the ideas don't go anywhere. So you're doing a good job. Yep. And in the midst of it, writing a book, Why You Matter. And this is what kind of sparked and was the catalyst for this conversation, because as I said, that crisis of meaning, downstream of that are all sorts of symptoms that we're seeing in culture, and we're feeling them personally, and they're impacting organizations and families. And at the center of that crisis of meaning is the question, where does meaning come from, and what makes something meaningful? And so I got into Why You Matter, page 27, bold font. You say, you name it, big, bold letters, a crisis of meaning. When you wrote that, what did you mean? What are you describing when you say there's a crisis of meaning?
So the idea for the book goes back, gosh, who knows? On the other side of COVID, everything to me I say is 5 years ago, whether it literally was or it wasn't. It's just I can't ever figure out how long ago things were. COVID threw my whole sense of time off. So whatever, it feels like 5 years ago. But whenever this idea came, I was sitting in a Sunday school class, and the notion of like kind of a biblical anthropology, what does it mean to be human? What just became obvious to me, that I was sitting around a bunch of people who had adopted a secular understanding of that notion, like who am I? They couldn't think outside of the box of like, I am that which I do, that my identity is fundamentally attached to the characteristics that I have, the accomplishments that I have, the sexual orientation I have. And it was, I do, therefore I am kind of idea, not that my nature gives virtue to my activity, or my nature is the source of my value. As an image bearer of God, what I am constitutes my value, and what I am is kind of the fertile soil out of which my identity grows my uniqueness, not the other way around kind of thing. Anyways, so I started exploring that idea in some talks and found, yeah, man, it seems like the church has entirely forgotten Genesis 1 and 2 and the implications of what it means to be made in the image of God. Now, so a crisis of meaning, it really, the ideas that have led to this crisis of meaning aren't new ideas. They really are Enlightenment ideas that have been working their way into Western society for the last couple of hundred years. You could pick a couple of figures to highlight this, but Nietzsche's an easy one, of course, right? Nietzsche comes along. He's really a post-Enlightenment philosopher right at the tail end of it. And one of the consequences of the Enlightenment was there was this rejection of God, at least from the academic or the upper class, the intellectual elites. They had rejected this notion of God. And, Nietzsche, of course, famously declares that God is dead. And when Nietzsche is doing that, particularly in the parable of the madman, it's not really a celebration of God's demise, and neither is it like a new announcement. It's kind of like everybody already knew God was dead, and it was just a matter-of-fact statement from Nietzsche. But especially in Parable of the Madman, he wasn't really celebrating it. He was really mocking atheists and their hubris, acting as if the death of God it's no big consequence for us. It's just we should move on from childish things, and life's going to go on as it was. And Nietzsche's like, no, the death of God is a cataclysmic event, like the earth being unchained from the sun. When God dies, the metaphysical underpinnings of the Western world go with it. What does it mean to be human? What is the source of human value? Even the very notion of good. How do you define good now in any kind of objective sense? Nietzsche recognized that all of this goes away when God dies. When you abandon Christianity, all that comes with that goes away. And the Western world, the modern Western world, if you will, was certainly, well, I guess it's just fair to say the Western world was built off of Christian ideas. Long and the short of this, Nietzsche recognized this and would regularly mock atheists for their lack of insight and inconsistency. He would say, yeah, you have no problem with this because you really haven't grappled with what we have done. You're claiming you have moral intuitions, which is really just the remnants of Christianity hanging out in your culture and your mind, and you're not aware of it. Once you realize fully what the death of God means, and you come to grips with the profound meaning of the loss of meaning, what that really means, it's going to be a hard time. Nietzsche did not expect many people would be able to overcome it. He thought many people would succumb to really a nihilistic, nothing matters perspective. His implicit hope would be that there would become this rise of the Superman, those really strong individuals that were able to accept that life has no inherent meaning, but would be able to create that meaning for themselves out of nothing. And we're still living in the remnants of that. There's still, like, I guess a fair way to describe this is we're kind of living in this morally fragmented time where you have the remnants of a Christian worldview and things like there's purpose, true purpose, things like human dignity, that humans are valuable because they're valuable. Because they're human. And these are direct consequences of a Christian worldview, where if you're made in God's image and life is here as the result of a divine creator, then life is instilled with inherent meaning and intrinsic value. That's the way a lot of Western people operate. I'm valuable because I'm a human, and the things that I do are actually meaningful. Well, that makes sense in a Christian worldview. In an atheistic worldview, humans aren't valuable by virtue of what they are. They can only become valuable because of some other reason. And life does not have inherent meaning or purpose. It has to be created. And it's really arbitrary in that sense. So that's the crisis of meaning. We're living in a time where people want to have like one foot in both camps. This idea that, no, I can create my own meaning for myself. Whatever it is, identity, sexual identity, purpose in life, I can create it all for myself. And they're living as if, though, it has kind of this objective, true meaning and value. And for some people it works, and for some people it doesn't. At the end of the day, some people are like, you know what? I had a young girl put it to me this way after a lecture on a topic like this. She said, I'm tracking with you. I agree that if God does not exist, life has no inherent meaning. And we're free to create meaning for ourselves, whatever it is. She said, that idea is actually really freeing to me. life's so stressful. She said, from the moment you can talk, people are asking you, what do you want to be when you grow up in life? And they never stop asking that question. And then it's, have you joined this cause? What do you think about this issue? Have you joined that club? What are your SAT scores? What are you going to do in life? What college are you going to go to? Who are you going to marry? And it's just this one achievement after the next kind of thing that has the pressure of, just the stress that comes along with it. And she says, so the thought that none of it really makes any difference is freeing. Bake cookies, make millions, solve a crisis, live in your parents' basement. It doesn't matter. They're all the same as long as it makes you happy. So she's like, it's kind of stress-free. I mean, it's a very stress-free kind of life. She goes, but on the other hand, it would be kind of nice to know that my choices and decisions and the things that I accomplished actually mattered in a way that had greater significance than simply satisfying my arbitrary subjective preferences. And I was like, dang, that is a great way to put it, right? The tension between the freedom and the futility of a godless universe. And so that's kind of, maybe that was a mouthful coming out, but a crisis of meaning involves that. All people want to feel as if their life actually matters, and matters in a way of greater significance than simply the satisfaction of their own subjective personal preferences. Well, if God does not exist, what's the justification to believe that your actions actually matter in a way that goes beyond just how you feel about them? So that's kind of the idea trying to be explored in that book, more from a pastoral angle, maybe, than perhaps from an academic one.
Yeah. Well, thank you for going all the way back to the academic side of that. I don't think that you can divorce it. And I think that goes back to some of the original friction that maybe led you into the work of apologetics, or to Lewis, that, he was speaking about things that mattered because reality is a cohesive, integral whole. And if we bifurcate it out and say, well, I pretend to have meaning over here, but in my real life, I live according to this, that doesn't work. And I love that you went to Nietzsche. I feel like he was late 1800s, and he's saying, okay, this boat has been pushed. The Enlightenment boat, the gas driving that thing has stopped. God is dead. But the inertia of that movement has continued for like 100 years. But you have Lewis warning, you have Nietzsche's warning, you have everybody warning. Eventually that thing is going to run aground, and it is going to, and the violent cavitation that's going to happen when that philosophical idea actually does run aground, it's going to be devastating. And I feel like we're probably just offshore. There's people waking up and say, did you feel that? Like gravel under the boat? Like you can feel that those ideas are running out of gas. And I think that's why it's so important that what you just did, drawing a straight line, saying this didn't happen out of nowhere. Like there were philosophical shifts and movements that essence preceding existence, expressive individualism, all these little moves that happened to where today a young girl says, I wish it mattered.
Yeah. I'm curious is a poor word, but when that gas is going to be run out, when the tank's going to be empty. You have Jordan Peterson, for example, using a different analogy here, but the same idea. And Peterson, of course, even if you follow him, he's not a Christian. He really tries to be elusive in some ways on his beliefs. But that reminds me of a really fascinating thing that maybe we can talk about later, something he brought up. But he used this idea. He said that the Western world is living off the corpse of its ancestors.
Yep.
And he means Christianity there.
And he says at some point that stops being nourishing. And you have to replenish it with something else. And he says, I don't think we're replenishing it and we're running out of time. I think that was part of Nietzsche's warning. Nietzsche's a complicated guy, and sometimes it's hard to know his motivations or whatever. But in his mocking of the atheist hubris, he's like, no, you've pronounced God's dead, but you're still just leaning on the rest of Christianity to support the Western way of life. You got to come up with entirely new just groundings and justifications for our values or the values that you want, which you can make up, but you got to do it. You can't just keep relying on Christianity. And I think that's what we've done. George Orwell, another interesting guy, writes about this. He wrote this fascinating essay called Notes on the Way. Of course, Orwell wrote 1984, Animal Farm. And gosh, also another side note. Have you read any of the dystopian fictional novels from the last 50 years? Are we not living in that dystopian reality? The sci-fi of the past has become the present day reality in these dystopian novels. Anyhow, but Orwell, in Notes on the Way, he laments, or he's got, how does he put it? He has this line where he said, for 200 years, we had been sawing on the branch we were sitting on. And much more quicker than we expected, we succeeded and we came down. We cut through the branch and we came down. And he's, of course, referencing the Christian worldview or belief in God. And he said, what we found at the bottom, though, wasn't a bed of roses. It was a cesspool full of barbed wire. And he's referencing the horror, of course, of the 20th century and the world wars. And he goes on in this essay talking about things like when our heavenly Father was killed off by us, mankind ceased to have a reason to view each other as their brothers. And in this, he does not offer a hopeful way forward. He just laments what is without a clear vision on how to resolve this. And I kind of still feel like we're still coasting, right? Because in this society, we have notions like human dignity, and everybody believes in equality now. But if humans aren't intrinsically valuable by virtue of what they are, what grounds human value? What makes us all equal? You can't just say, well, just because we are. What's the answer to that? For thousands of years, the answer to that was rooted in the fact that people believed that human beings were made in God's image. Even the Declaration of Independence makes reference to the rights that human beings have by virtue of their creator. Well, when there is no creator, what happens to human dignity? What happens to the very notion of ethics? Yeah, so I don't know how much more we can coast. I'm with you. It feels like, did we hit the bottom? And it could be that we wake up almost tomorrow in a horrifying place, or who knows, maybe we coast 50, 60, 100 more years. I don't know, but point of it being, it's not going to stay pretty for very long.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I think Peterson's right. I think, as you said, it's not just from the Christian circles or religious circles. I think everybody is sensing that sense that we're running out. There is nothing nourishing those ideas anymore. And so those ideas are dying off, or the inertia, the gas has run out and we're coasting on the inertia now of those ideas. I think what's hopeful to me is I meet young people, and there is a legitimate recognition now that, like, oh, right. It was in fashion for a while to say, yeah, let's keep deconstructing. And I think enough people have seen through the deconstructionism that, at least for me, I see young people and they're ready, but they're not resourced, right? There's like a desire to say, yeah, no, there's something there that was good and true and beautiful. And we long for those things and we want them. And we hear that invitation, even like a memory of it, the ancient ways and the old paths. But there's a suspicion about Christianity because we look over and we're like, I intuitively know it comes from there. But what I've seen isn't the deep rooted, good, true, beautiful that I long for from Christianity. I see this kind of veiled, enlightenment driven, individualistic, politicized veneer of Christianity. And so there's a rejection of it. And it's not a rejection of the deep things that Jordan Peterson's getting at. Like, he's going straight at the Genesis narrative, the Exodus narrative, and he's saying it's right there, right here it is.
Right.
It's in Christianity, and people are like, no, you're just late to the party. Christianity, trust me, it doesn't have it. That's a thin veneer. Are you experiencing that? Are you catching or feeling that same thing?
Yeah, I'm not pessimistic about things, to be honest. I'm actually optimistic, and that may just be little bit of personality and part of who I am.
You
But
live in Peachtree City. How can you not be somewhat optimistic?
that's
right, I'm married to the beautiful Terriana. I mean, come on. Um, but a couple of things for optimism is, especially for the country in which we live, there's still never been a country like this, built upon the ideas that have been reflected in law. Laws here still are really good. I mean, there's bad laws, but the laws in our country really do provide us with a great deal of freedom and the opportunity for all people to flourish, as opposed to some other countries. A lot of times we get this narrow vision based on cases of injustice here in this country, and it's good for us to see that and right for us to identify them. But the very fact that we can identify them and then pursue justice is also a blessing of this country that does not exist in many places around the world. The laws are skewed. They're in favor of really certain people, and in a way that doesn't even come close to comparing to whatever kind of injustices you find here in the United States. So the very nature of our country is a reason to be optimistic, but also there's millions of Christians in this country. Millions. What if they were awakened to these deeper truths instead of put to sleep by the soft soap Christianity that is peddled every Sunday in so many different churches around here? All right, just enough stuff to, here mix my metaphors, to salve the conscience, to make you feel that you've done your Christian duty for the week just by showing up to a service where you sing horrible songs in the dark so nobody knows you're there, listen to a self-help message while your kids are back in Wazumba land learning abstract life lessons about how they can conquer their own Goliath. And then you do that for an hour a week and you move on. So, sorry, I'm getting old man soapboxy here.
No, I love it.
But the younger generations in particular, yeah,
they see through it.
They see through it, and even those that don't, there's many that walk away from it. Well, see through it is why they walk away from it. Like, if this is all there is,
I'm out.
Forget it.
Yep.
So for so many in the younger generations, they haven't rejected Christianity. They've rejected that thin veneer. They've rejected this event that people are putting on every week. Christianity in the United States is event centered. It's an event driven religion at this point, centered around meeting 1 hour a week, high production, non-engaging, sit, listen in a passive environment, and then skip off to lunch and watch football. That's a horrible representation. That's a horrible. I mean, you think about the imagination of a younger generation when they think of church, and their imagination kicks in. What they think of church, and their mind goes to an hour service, and that's what it is to be a church. It's gross. It's a disgusting vision of what it is to be the church. Right? You don't go to church. We are the church. It's a disgusting vision to have, as of what it means to be God's people. So, yeah, in my long-winded soapbox there, I think I kind of missed the original point of your question. But the younger generations, they can see through that, and they know if that's all there is, there's nothing to it. They suspect that there's more to the story, though.
Yep.
And when somebody will tell them that story, they come alive. They really do.
Yeah. Well, it's because the story's enchanted. You and I have had this conversation before. When you can uncover that story and say, you're not just living in a material world, and you're not in a world that designs itself. It actually is derived in its beauty and its life from a designer. I find this all the time. As soon as you tell that story, it's enchanting. And it's a world made by love and made for love. It didn't have to come into being. I mean, this is the beauty. It's right there. And so that's why I appreciate the rigor that you're able to bring to the conversation to say there is a line of thought that we can trace back. This isn't just feelings. It's not just a subjective thing. There's a real conversation. I appreciate that, the rigor. Second thing I appreciate is a little bit of prophetic zeal there to say we need to it's urgent that we face the reality that's really uncomfortable, that we do, and nobody wants to. You have this conversation, you go, we've got to start really rooting into these deeper truths and realities, and have a gospel that is the whole world, and it's a public truth.
Yeah.
And it's that we have to recover that type of posture in the church. And the only way to do it is by looking at the things that are not that and saying, okay, that's not that. So I appreciate the rigor. I appreciate the prophetic kind of fire and zeal. And I also appreciate the initiatives like the 7x7, the work to that next younger generation. Talk specifically about what are you learning about engagement from the young generations? Is there that same curiosity and hunger? Is there a readiness to be resourced, or are we still in a mode where we're saying, no, we need to tell that enchanted story so that people develop a longing for that, and then we can resource? Which would you say is our moment?
Yeah. Well, with the younger generations, and probably with any group of people, there's always the danger of oversimplifying and reducing them to like this monolithic group that all thinks and acts the same way. Teenagers are pretty all over the place, as most people groups, demographics probably are. But you can give some generalities without, I think, risking oversimplifying things. There's a vast number. There's a large group of teenagers that have no idea what Christianity is, and they've grown up in the church. They don't. And that's one of the things we routinely find through our 7x7 groups. They don't know Christianity. No one's ever taught it to them. You're like, how's that possible? They literally grew up in their life. Well, you go to church, you know what's taught there. You know what, and even here, let's even pick the best examples of really good Bible teaching churches. It's a passive learning environment where there's not consistent attendance. And even by consistent attendance, I just mean by virtue of the culture we live in. Most people don't have one job the rest of their life. They move. And so you're not a part of one church fellowship for very long. So whatever started in one there's a lack of continuity kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So even in really good teaching churches where the focus is that 1 hour on Sunday, you have kind of just this pieced together theology. So whether it's the worst case scenario of a church or the best case, when the expectation is come on one morning for 1 hour a week and don't find smaller discipleship communities that are much more work intensive, what the result is each, and we've seen this generationally, each generation has less and less biblical knowledge. And it makes sense if, like my parents' generation, if you want to say that maybe there was a start here and they didn't have it to pass it on to me, which means I don't have it to pass on to the next. And that's many people's experience. Fortunately, it's not really mine. I come from my parents really understood Christianity, were able to pass it on. But so that's one of the things we're finding is the younger generations just are, generally speaking, clueless when it comes to the Christian faith. You ask a room of seniors that grew up in church, hey, what is the gospel? Could you give me just a basic understanding of it? And you're going to get this. Jesus, and the cross. You don't get a lot of good answers. And man, I know I'm sounding pretty gloom on the younger generations. This isn't their fault.
No, not at all.
They've not been taught this. And so they don't know what the Bible is. They don't know how to read it. They don't know how to explain the gospel. They don't understand the nature of God. They don't understand mere Christianity. And I don't mean Lewis's book. I mean the essentials of the Christian faith. So that's one thing that's true of this generation. Second thing that's true is they're being killed on social issues, sexual ones in particular. You're not going to find a young man or a young woman that's not suffering from an addiction to pornography. Hardly you're not going to find one. For years, it was predominantly a male issue. That's not the case anymore. I think it's probably in the category to this point, more young women than not are interacting or struggling with pornography. I give a lot of talks on pornography, and throughout the years, it was always, a male response. Some of the research and literature was showing that was shifting. There's much more shame associated with young women looking at porn than men. So those numbers are going to skew low in reporting. And this past summer, when I spoke and had a number of talks on this, I had just as many young women, of course, in a group setting, not one-on-one, opening up about their struggles with pornography. So they're facing that. Every young adult knows somebody who is coming out as gay or trans or questioning it. They're growing up in a culture that is making those people in the LGBTQ community, they are heroes, and cis people tend to fall in. That means, the gender that you had when you were born, and, straight. Um, they tend to put them in the oppressor categories. So there's a lot of pressure to actually be something on the spectrum of the LGBTQ world. So they're feeling that pressure. They're struggling with pornography. No one has given them a biblical understanding of sex. Either it's just don't do it and not understand the goodness of it and the beauty of it and what the design is and the meaning of sex. So they're really being hit hard there. But then the third thing here, so you've got they've never been introduced to Christianity. Sexual issues and pressures are intense with them right now. That's really acutely felt by them. But the third thing is they are loving and accepting and eager to have answers to their questions. If you just want to talk about the 7x7 experience, we've had a number of people that will take our curriculum and start it. And then first week, they're like, how am I going to do this? This isn't going to work. And then the report back is, I had to stop the conversation after 3 hours.
Yeah.
These kids want to know what is true. They want to explore, and they sense that there's more to the story, right? And when someone helps them pursue that story, they really do fall in love with Jesus and the goodness of the Christian worldview. And they see why this is not just good for them, but it's good for their friends. It's good for their cities. It's good for this world. And they become a force to be reckoned with for good. They want to then go change the world.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so good. And I think that's why the resources you're providing through 7x7 are so important. Just as a resource ministry, Apologetics Inc., as a place that somebody can go. And this is what I love about the work you're doing, that somebody in Seattle, somebody in Portland, somebody in LA can go to Apologetics Inc. and there are resources, and you're directing people to resources, and even a 7x7 group. I'm sure something you said resonates with somebody who's listening and goes, yeah, that intense sexual cross pressure, that lack of biblical understanding, but that super, super leaning in posture from you just described my kid and all of their friends. What do we do next? And I think that's where the work you're doing is so important. The writing, Why You Matter, to catalyze these conversations and to let people know, even our own kids, it's okay that you feel that crisis of meaning, because there is a crisis of meaning. You didn't make it up. It's not a you problem. There's you've come of age in a moment that has these massive questions, plus all of the friction that comes from a church that has struggled itself with all of that, right? They can point and say, look at all the sexual, just complete tragedy in the church's life as we're trying to make sense of sexual issues, and we're feeling that sexual pressure. The very people who are kind of condemning us and pointing fingers towards us in this moment to get it right are rampant with issues. It's one after another.
Yeah, right.
And so I think that's why the work you're doing is so important. So, Mike, thank you. This is why, give a quick little on-ramp to the work and the resource that you're providing. How can people connect with Apologetics Inc.? How can people connect to 7x7 and some of the things that you are doing to resource people for the moment?
Yeah. The website's apologetics.org. Easy to remember, easy to find us. A couple of ways to connect with us is we have a growing team of speakers that are really qualified and experienced apologists that will engage these meaningful issues of our time. Our speakers are, equipped to cover everything from the classical apologetics realm, like the reliability of Bible, problem of evil, but our team is also skilled at addressing these cultural issues. And I'm grateful to see the church opening their doors on these cultural issues. I spoke, just 2 nights ago on basically biblical sexuality, how to keep the faith in a sexually broken world. I must have said the word sex 50 times in this talk because of the nature of it. Talked about pornography, talked about transgenderism and detransitioners, and my point is that I had somebody come up to me afterwards and said, you know what? I'm really excited that my church hosted this. 5-10 years ago, I can't imagine so many of these churches in the South being willing to engage these topics. But it was fresh air is maybe a poor word, but that's the word that they described it as, just fresh air. We need to learn about these things. We need to be able to talk about it. And that's the other thing our talks do, is it gives people permission to talk about it.
Yeah, sure.
Like when you talk about pornography or marriage or whatever, it gives them the permission to now ask questions. So the thing about, just here's the plug, right? Our speakers are salaried, which means they can go strategically wherever without first thinking about, can these people cover my honorarium so I can pay the bills? So that's our funding strategy, is we raise funds so we can send our speakers anywhere. So anybody listening here, and you have the need for a well-trained speaker on these kinds of issues, hit us up and let us partner with you. And when I say partner, I mean it. We want to strategize regarding these events. I find little value in one-off events. You bring in a speaker, they do a great job, they go home, people go, wow, that was great, and then they go on to the rest of their life. No, how can we partner with the work you're already doing and let an event like this be a catalyst or fuel to the fire that's already going in line with that? So reach out to us there. It's also where apologetics.org. It's also where you can find out stuff about 7x7 conversations. We've got 3 tracks ready and available. So anybody that wants to start a small group discipleship kind of small discipleship group, we've got resources for you, and we're able to help you, get you started, answer questions along the way. But yeah, just reach out to us at apologetics.org. You can find some resources there. And the big thing to know about us is we value community and relationships. So we're just an email away on a lot of these things.
Yeah, I would love that. And you mean it too. You really do make time and are responsive. So thank you for that. And I love that note as a close, like that prophetic side, that fiery side, to say it has to start with the local church can come off. People can be like, oh, Mike is an anti-church. No, Mike loves the church, deeply loves the church, respects the church. And I think all of us agree the local church is where this beautiful life of the gospel propagates. And so apologetics.org, resourcing the local church and championing the best of her. That's really your posture, and I love that. We're with you in that. So if you're a pastor, if you're part of a church, if you're a parent, apologetics.org, go check it out. It's a great resource, and I think it's just like the best years are ahead. There's a ton of great history with your organization, but your leadership's really opening the door to our moment. So Mike, thanks so much. Thanks for Why You Matter. If you're interested in that book, it's a great starting point for this quest for meaning, and is meaningless without God. So it's a great read. So Mike, thanks so much.
Thanks, Zach, man. It's always good to hang out.
Yeah, we'll do it again.